Hey guys, it's Austin here with Outcheaping, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to wire in LED fog lights. Today we're going to be doing it on this 99 Cherokee, but it's pretty much going to be similar for any vehicle that you put fog lights on. So, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we need to look at is what type of lights we're going to be installing. So all these lights here, they're sent to me by SUPAREE. I'll put a link in the description below on where you guys can find them. But today I'm basically going to be installing these where the Cherokee factory fog lights would be going. And what I have right here are some LED spotlights, and over here I got some LED fog lights. And the difference is obviously one's more of kind of like a spot on action, and then over here with these bezels, they're kind of like more rigid and they kind of display the light in a more wider pattern. So I'm actually going to go with the spot ones on my Jeep today because the headlights do a good enough job. So these are only meant for like as high beams or for off-road purposes. So along with this, they came with hardware and some Allen wrench right here that you can tighten up the bolts with. And they did also come with a wiring harness which has your relay and everything you need. It's basically plug and play, but we are going to be changing this up slightly. And with that, I'm actually going to be installing a different fog light switch, because the switch that's on this one is just a simple cheap on and off one, and I'm not a big fan of those guys, so we're going to be wiring in something different. So the switch that I went with today, it's a OEM style looking switch, but this one's slightly customized with the spotters on here. These ones will fit the interior of the Jeep across any Wrangler or Cherokee, and these custom ones are actually made on eBay. I'll put a link in the description below for this as well. This ran me about 20 bucks, but it comes with the little pigtail. The only thing that's different between this and your factory fog light switch is that it does not have the illumination light in the background. That's not too big of a deal for me, but this will work just fine for working these lights. Along with that, I'm also going to be installing this USB port. I have a video on this if you guys are interested. Basically, it just replaces one of your cigarette lighters and has an in-dash USB port install. Along with that, we have some wiring that I picked up. This is just normal 14 gauge, which is plenty for these lights over here. So along with the lights over there, we do have some XJ headlights. I'm not going to be installing these today, but I wanted to show you guys what SUPAREE offers. This light's kind of cool. It has your normal H4 connector, so high beam, low beam. It does have a driving light in there, which is actually red. So I know that's not legal in my state, even though this does says .SA approved, but I looked up in my regulations and I can't have that as a driving light. Then it also has another wire for a turn signal, and if you guys know, like with the Mustangs, how they kind of like flicker with the three tail lights, it does the same thing here with the turn signal. So if you guys are interested in these, I'll have a link in the description below where you can find them as well. So one thing I haven't done before that I'm going to be doing on this install is actually adding Deutsche connectors instead of your normal spay connectors. And basically these are just 12 volt waterproof connectors, and they help keep out the water and salt and everything like that, so you don't have any wiring issues in the future. They're actually pretty easy to install, so I'll just show you guys how to do that. I did it over here and it actually came out nicely for my first one. But you're going to need a proper crimping tool. This ran about 12 bucks on Amazon, and the connectors come like this, and you got your little inserts, you crimp them on, and then you also got the seal. So I'll be showing you guys how to install that right away as well. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do to start installing all this stuff is actually install the wire harness, and I just kind of have this laid out, kind of mocked up on where it's going to be going. Obviously inside the engine bay, but over here I just have it on top of the hood, and we can kind of see how much length we have with all this wire that's right here. So over on this side we have our relay along with our positive and negative eyelet terminals, which are going to go to a positive battery source and a ground. So on this end over here, it's not as long as I'd like, but I think it might work because there is still kind of some slack in the lights themselves, so they can kind of go up and plug to help make up for that distance. But I think the distance over here from the relay going down to where the fog lights are going to mount, that's going to be perfect. We might have some extra, so we'll just zip tie that and bunch it up. Now as far as over here, this is what's going to run inside your cab. This is your on and off switch, and it's basically three wires. We got a positive wire, we got a ground, and then we got a wire going back to the relay. So whenever that switch is on, it's going to send power to that relay to activate your lights. And what I'm going to be doing, since I'm installing my own switch, is basically just going to be cutting this off, and I might utilize a ground that's already inside the cab and a positive wire to be able to activate the switch and give power to over here when that switch is flipped on. And by doing it this way, you can either get a full positive from inside the cab, or you can get it when the ignition is on, so that way you don't accidentally leave your fog lights on when your Jeep is off. So I actually might do that today. It's kind of a fail safe, so that way you don't kill the battery. Alright, so if you guys have seen my last video on the XJ headlight harness install, it's going to be pretty similar on where we're going to be locating things. So I've decided I'm going to mount the relay right next to where the headlight relays are, and to be able to get at that, I'm actually going to be removing the battery. It's pretty simple. We got two 13mm bolts and then a 1/2-inch wrench to take off these terminal posts. Oops. Alright, so with that battery out of there, we can work around here a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm going to do with this wiring harness is actually mount our relay. There's a little hole right here in this metal tab that connects our relay, so we can mount this somewhere solid so that way it's not flopping around. And if you guys saw the last video, we installed our headlight relays right down here, and there's just not enough room to actually have this right next to it because the battery is going to go right down here and I don't want stuff touching each other. And to mount these relays down here, if you guys don't have these, you can mount the relay for this harness down there as well. But basically what I did was utilize one of the holes for the cruise control module, and that's just going to be an 8mm screw that goes right down there, and I just put the relays over that and screwed everything back together, so now it's solid. And I'm basically going to do the same thing except for up here on this other screw where the cruise control module is. And I just had to bend this little tab at a 45-degree angle, so that way I can bolt it right here, and then all of our wires are going to be going that way. So that way it's a little bit more organized, it's not all stuffed down into here. So the only thing we have to really work around is this vacuum line right here, but I think we can get around that easily. So I'm just going to take off this screw. It's going to be an 8mm. So I'm just going to move that vacuum line to the side right here. It should still be fine, nothing's kinked, and then thread our screw back into place. And you might need to get a wrench since I kinked that at a 45. It's hard to get the ratchet in there now. Now we can snug it up, and now our relay is mounted. Another thing you got to keep in mind is you don't want to install your relay too high because we do have the hood prop. When it folds down, it clips right into here, so we just want to keep that in mind. Okay, so now we got all the wires that are coming out of the relay over here. We got our ground and we got our main positive, so you can either have these go directly to the battery terminals over here, but for me I like to keep it a little bit more organized. I have a common ground on the fender over here, so that's where I'm going to have the ground connect. And then as far as the positive, I'm going to do the positive side of the factory relay box, so that's just going to mount down in there. Then you can also find an easy access area if you want to zip tie your fuse holder in place, so that way if you do blow a fuse, you know where to get at it right away. But for this install, since this is all pre-made wire harness, I'm going to definitely have some extra slack, so I might be bunching up the wires and zip tying it, and I'm just going to all put it right in this area right here, so that way it's out of the way of everything else. Alright, so I went ahead and got our positive and ground all hooked up. I went and got our positive to this positive terminal that's on the factory relay box. So let's just say 13mm nut, pop that off, put the terminal on there, and screw it back down. So now we can put this cover back on. It just basically slides into these grooves and then clips into place. And then the ground down here, there is a factory ground that's a 10mm bolt that goes to the fender, but since mine broke off, I just made another bolt over here in my last video, so this is my common ground. So that's where I wired our ground into right there. So before I go and start routing this, I'm going to take care of our switch first. So for the wire harness that goes into the cab, it's basically 3 wires. We got our ground, we have our live hot wire, and then we also have our return power that when you turn on the switch, it gives power to the relay. So since I'm actually going to be taking a ground and our positive wire, I'm going to take that from inside the cab from one of the other switches. All I really need is this blue wire right here, which is our return power back to our relay. So instead of routing all this wire through, since we're going to be going through the firewall, it's hard to get a plug like that inside. So I'm actually just going to be cutting this about 1 foot after the relay or so, and I'm just going to be extending that blue wire, capping off the other two since I'm getting power from the inside, and then we should be able to route one wire all the way to where our switch panel is going to be. Now once again, if you're going to be splicing wires like me, make sure you have your battery disconnected, or at least your positive and negative disconnected from this wiring harness that you're installing. Alright, so now inside the Jeep we can take a look on where we're going to be installing our switch at. Now since this Jeep right here did not come with a factory fog light option, we're going to have to install our own switch right here. So I went with this one right here, and the reason why was because it actually matches the other two right here, and I've actually used other rocker switches in the past, and they're slightly bigger, and you're going to have to notch out this bezel piece right here, and I'm not a big fan of doing that, so I just went and spent the 20 bucks and got a factory looking one with little custom spotters on here. I should also mention, if your Jeep actually did come with a factory fog lights and it has a factory fog light switch, installing new lights is actually going to be a heck of a lot easier because the wiring harness is already there. So all you got to do is basically splice your new lights into the existing fog light harness, and you should be on your way. But for this, if you were to convert it to having the factory harness, you would have to pull the headlight harness out of another Jeep that had the fog lights, because that's how it's all tied in together. So over here I just have a little microphone that was for the head unit over here, but I'm going to be relocating this, and then there's an empty stall right there where we can install this switch. So first thing I'm going to do is actually remove this panel right here. It's pretty simple. So we just got to remove this bezel, and to give you more room I put the shifter all the way back like that with the parking brake on. Then put that to the side. And now to remove this panel right here, we have 3 Phillips screws, so I'm going to undo that as well. Alright, so to fully remove this, we got all these connectors back here that we're going to have to remove. And if you notice over here on the back of this empty plate where we're going to be installing our new switch is actually a wiring harness that basically connects to a piece of plastic. And that is actually part of the fog light harness. If you were to fully complete it, you can utilize these wires. But since we don't have the headlight harness with the fog light option, we can't really utilize all that and have it plug and play. But we might utilize a couple wires from there, like I said earlier, to use for the switch. But for now, let's just unplug everything so that way we can get this panel out. Alright, so with the switch panel removed, we can go and cut this little panel out and then be able to pop in our new switch. Now one thing I did notice when I ordered the switch is actually it won't easily pop in like these other switches right here if you didn't originally have a switch. And the reason being is they don't have these little tabs that are right down here, which is actually what this switch pops into. So I might have to get a little creative and maybe plastic weld this into place or just glue it for now. That way it'll be nice and secure. But there is some other aftermarket options out there that some people actually 3D print these panels, and you can have panels that have a bunch of switches on them other than these 3 right here. Now since I do have an extra switch panel right here, I might get creative and actually detach some of these clips right here and plastic weld them to the other switch panel over here, and maybe it'll work for clipping this in. Otherwise we'll just plastic weld it into the panel or even glue it. Alright, so I went and got my switch installed as well as this USB port. If you're wondering how to wire this in, I got a separate video for that, like I said earlier. And I was able to get this in actually pretty nicely. And what I ended up doing was actually just cutting off those plastic tabs and plastic welding it into place, like I said earlier, from this spare switch that was over here. So those actually broke off nicely. I just took a pair of needle nose pliers and they popped off. Then took a soldering iron and just kind of plastic welded it in. And then to get that hole all cut out, basically I just took a razor blade, put it underneath a torch, and then I just cut out a general square, and then I went ahead and used the Dremel and cleaned it up a bit. So now we got a switch that works in there. It's nice and solid. So before we go and reinstall this, let's route that one wire through the firewall that goes to our relay, which is going to connect to the white one over here, and then we can also splice in these 2 other wires into that cigarette lighter. Okay, so now I'm going to get the hard part out of the way. Basically what we have to do is feed a wire through the firewall, and the best way I like to do it is actually just to take a coat hanger and electrical tape the wire to it, so that way we can poke it through the existing grommet right here, and it should feed the wire through underneath the dash on the passenger side. So right here I got my wire attached. This is kind of overkill for just a switch. It's 14 gauge wire. That's all the long length wire I actually had at the moment. So now we're just going to find that grommet, which is over here where we have the existing wiring harness, and I'm not going to go exactly through the same hole because I don't want to risk this actually puncturing another wire. But since the grommet's actually big enough, we can kind of go to the side of it and poke our new hole right in next to it. Alright, so I'll pop through. Now you just got to feel around, and once we get through that grommet, we want to take the coat hanger and kind of go down at a 45-degree angle, so that way it goes around the HVAC box and comes out towards the passenger side kick panel. Alright, so we're here by the passenger side kick panel, and actually remove the kick panel. It's pretty easy to do. You just got a 11mm nut, and then to remove a couple Phillips screws right behind it, and the thing pops off. But basically we're going to be looking for our coat hanger, and as you can see, it's right here. For me, I actually had to look up way into there, and it's kind of hard to see. You got to stick your head up there, then see if you can find it, take it with your fingers, and pull it all the way down. So now we can finish pulling this all the way through. And actually, since my coat hanger is kind of bent at the end, I'm just going to undo the electrical tape right now. Then I'll pull out the coat hanger, the side that it came in through the engine bay. Just make sure to hold on to your wire so that way it doesn't go with it as well. Okay, so now with that wire all in here, I'm just going to keep feeding it through till I need the proper amount. So basically I'm just going to be routing this wire all the way behind where the existing wiring harness is, just kind of zip tie it in place, and then it's going to lead all the way up to where the switch panel is over there. Okay, so now it's time to finally finish up the switch here with all the wiring, and this is the pigtail that comes out of the new switch. We just have a simple 3 wires. So our white wire is going to go to our wire that we fed through the firewall, and that's actually up here. So I'm just basically going to put a butt connector on this and splice that into there. So then we have our black wire, which is our ground, so you can splice that into any of these black wires that come out of any of the switches here, because it's all just going to be a ground. And then we have our red positive wire right here, and since I want my fog lights to turn off when the ignition is off and on when the ignition is on, I'm just going to tap this into the driver's side power socket, which is these 2 wires over here. So just red wire is going to splice into that red one. And since I'm doing that over here, I'm just going to do the ground wire on the ground wire out of the driver's side socket as well. So I'm going to go and splice these all in, and then we should have a working switch. Alright, so I made all my connections, and we're ready to put the switch panel back into place. So we're just going to plug everything into where it usually goes. The only thing that's not going to be plugging in is the factory fog light harness over here that used to go into that empty spot. That's not going to be plugging into anything, so we're just going to tuck that away back behind here. Alright, so I went and connected the battery to show you guys that this is all working now. So if I put it in the run position, as you can see, our USB lights up, so that way we should have power to our fog light switch over here. If I click it on, it lights up right there. So everything is all hooked up properly for the switch here. Alright, so back under the hood here, we have our 3 wires that are supposed to go to our switch, and we got a red wire that's coming out of the cab going to the relay. So basically we're just going to cut this off to whatever length we need, and we're going to splice it into the blue wire right here. And this black and white wire we're not going to be using at all, so I'm going to take a little piece of heat shrink over that, and so that way it's all capped off and it can't corrode or short out on anything. Alright, so I finished up that connection, put a little bit of wire loom and zip tied it to this other wiring harness right here, so that way it's nice and tight out of the way. So now that the switch is all wired in, we can go and take the wires and wire in the fog lights that are up here on the front. And for my application, I noticed that this is a little bit shorter, so I'm just going to go and splice on some longer wires right here, and I'll cut them to length whenever I get this fully set in, and then I'll put a Deutsche connector on the end, so that way we can plug in our new fog light. As far as routing the rest of the harness, I'm going to be going through this access hole right over here, which is on the back side of the front clip, right next to the battery. And I'm just going to be wiring it in through that way, and basically the same way as I did for the headlight harness. I'm just going to be following the same routes, except for it's going to drop a little bit lower and go down there to where our fog lights are going to be mounted to. Alright, so to help route some of the wires to the front clip here, I'm just going to be removing the headlight bezels as well as the grille, so that way we can get the wires in there and zip tie them in nicely. And to remove the headlight bezels and grille, it's pretty simple. We just got Phillips screws on top, and they're clipped in by the bottom, so they just pull out. Alright, so a quick overview on how I'm routing these wires. They're going to come from the engine bay through that little access hole, and it'll eventually come out over here And for our passenger side fog light, we're going to take that wire and run it straight down from here. And if you can see down there, you can see the ground. So that's basically where our fog light is going to be mounted. And then for our driver's side, we're going to wire loom it all over here. And then the same thing right in this corner. We're going to go straight down and you can see the ground right down there. And that's where our fog light is going to mount. Alright, so off camera I did a little bit of lengthening and shortening of the wiring harness so that way it would fit perfect for the Cherokee. It's not necessary unless you really have to, but if you have any extra slack, you can always bundle it up and zip tie it. But I got the harness all finished in place. I just have it zip tied up here to the existing harness. And then our driver's side goes all the way down, and then right here is the end of the harness where we have our Deutsche connector where our new fog light is going to mount to. Now same thing on the passenger side, we have the connector over here as well. So before we install the fog lights, let's take a look on how to install these connectors onto the fog lights. Alright, so with these Deutsche connectors, also known as just waterproof connectors, it's really a watertight solution for having any accessories that are on your vehicle or any other wiring stuff that you don't want to get corroded from it being wet. So basically you just have a male and female side and they plug in like so and then they clip together. So basically I just got this off of Amazon. It's fairly cheap. They have your pin connectors that go inside of there that you're going to crimp onto the wire. One side is a pin and the other side is the basically a slot that the pin goes into. So we basically have to crimp this onto the wire. And then we also have seals on here because it not only seals from where you're connecting to, it seals in the back here where the wire goes into the back of the connector. So the only thing you have to really make sure on is if you're doing male and female side is make sure you have the wire on the correct side so that way when you plug it in they're not flipped, because once these guys are clipped in they won't come out. So I already done this one right here, but we're going to do the other fog light right here. So I'm going to go and strip these wires because they do have some solder on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is put on our seals, and these are going to go on the back side. So you want to make sure that the small part is facing towards the connector. Feed them on like so. So the way I'm going to be doing mine is I'm going to have these female end metal parts that go inside of the plastic clip. So I'm going to have these guys crimp onto these wires, and you are going to need a special crimping tool. I'll put this in a link below. This was fairly cheap off Amazon, but this helps give it a nice solid crimp, and normal wire crimpers will not do for this. So this is 18 gauge wire, so I'm going to select the 18 gauge one, put it in the slot where it's 18 gauge, and crimp it down. Alright, so now we got a nice strong crimp right there. Now the last thing we got to do is put our seal and scoot it up to where these other prongs are. On these crimpers they also have a seal crimp on here as well. I'm going to start with the big one, and since this is 18 gauge wire I'm going to use a small one as well. Now we can do the same thing with the other wire. Alright, so with those two crimped on, last thing we got to do is push it into the male plastic connector right here, and just got to make sure it's on the right terminal. So I'm just going to take this one for reference. So I'm going to put my positive wire on this side. So these guys, they just push into place and you'll hear a nice click. Last thing we got to do is just close up the back, and then it clips into place. Alright, so that's pretty much there is to it. It's a nice easy connection and doesn't take too long, not too much longer than a normal spade would. The female side is pretty much the same thing, except you're going to be swapping out these connectors for the corresponding other ones, so that way everything plugs in nicely. Alright, so we're looking underneath the Jeep here at the front bumper. This is the driver's side, and as you can see we have two cutouts right here. These cutouts that are more inward, these are actually, if you have any factory tow hooks, right here would be where it kind of sticks out. And over here would be if you have any factory fog lights, they would be in this area. So where I'm going to be installing my fog lights is actually in this factory area. And to save a little time, I'm actually just going to install it like right here. Maybe later on I might actually cut this out and kind of recess it into the bumper a little bit more, but I'm going to have to make another bracket off of the metal bumper that's up here so that way it can attach back there. But just for now, I'm going to be basically installing it right in this area. So to be able to install this, there is actually a couple holes on the factory bumper, and one of them is somewhat centered, but good thing that our bracket that our fog light is going to be onto is slotted, so basically we can bolt on our bracket right here and go all the way over there, and it's pretty much centered. So I'm going to be bolting that up there, and then this bracket bolts onto our light just like so, and it has provided hardware to be able to thread that into place and to adjust it. Alright, so before I bolt the bracket to the vehicle, I'm going to put the bracket on the light right away, so that way it's easier to fit in all these screws, because there's a nut that has to go on the back side in this heat sink, and it'll be a lot harder to do on the vehicle. Basically, we just got this bracket, slides into these slots right here, have our hardware, and then we got to feed in our nut and then screw it down. Alright, so with that bracket on there, we can go and install our light into place. I'm first going to feed our wire through the hole here, and then I have our 5/16 bolt on the bracket, and I'm going to push it through that hole that's already there on the bumper. And then on the top side, we got a lock washer and then a nut. Alright, so now we can take our electrical connector and plug it in. And then any excess wire, you can just take it and zip tie it inside of the bumper on the back side over here. That way it should be out of the way. Alright, so I did leave all that hardware loose, so that way you can actually adjust it. That last bolt that we put in is going to help it pivot, and then the two other bolts that bolt from the light to the bracket are going to go adjusting your up and down. So if you test it out and you like where it shines, all you have to do is tighten up all that hardware and it should be stuck into place. But for right now, we can install the other side, and it's going to be the exact same process. Alright, so before we can go test the fog lights, I have everything all zipped up and tucked away nicely, so I'm just going to go and reinstall the battery. Alright, so now that we're finished routing all the wiring harness to this front clip area, we can go and reinstall our grille as well as the headlight bezels. Alright, so as you can see, I got the passenger side installed as well, and they're both working nicely. I didn't bother showing that because this bumper is actually tweaked a little bit from a previous accident, so the light didn't necessarily fit level in there, so I had to do some tweaking on the bumper. But anyway, I'm not too thrilled about this. I might actually later on install them more deeper into the bumper, because I think they stick out like a sore thumb right now, so that'll be something for down the road, but for today I think that's good enough. Alright guys, that's pretty much going to be a wrap for today's video. I'm going to post in the description below all the links on all the stuff that I used in this video today, including SUPAREE lights and as well as those deutsche connectors and the crimping tool as well. But as far as content, hopefully you guys found this video helpful for installing aftermarket lights. This was a pretty much complete kit. I just decided to personalize it a little bit, but it's not totally necessary to do. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to the OutGPing YouTube channel to help keep these videos coming. And if you have any questions or comments, post them below and I'll be happy to answer them. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.